So continuing to talk about educational testing, aptitude, and achievement, we're going to be going through a lot of different types of achievement and aptitude tests that are currently available. So let's start with achievement tests. They're designed to measure accomplishment, purpose to assist instructors determining performance level of students. But we also have to ask, are students learning the materials taught? Are instructors teaching important materials? And are students over or underachieving? That's really the focus of achievement tests. So again, if we think of the stakeholders here are the individual students, the professor that's teaching the class, but also the university and the actual program that that class exists within. So all of those are going to be people that are interested in how successful the class is. So there are potential problems with achievement tests. One is teaching to the test. So whether the test is actually within the class itself or the test is known to the instructor, at that point the instructor may very well teach the test. When I give live lectures, I often tell people if I ever stop in the middle of a lecture and take a drink, I almost always have a drink with me when I'm lecturing, it's usually an indicator that I just said something that's on the test. I've recognized this tell actually, and it was a student many, many years ago that pointed out to me. They actually raised their hand and said, "Do you realize that you actually always stop and take a drink anytime you say something that you know is on the test?" That's an example of teaching to the test. It might not even be conscious. It's just, again, if you're teaching a class and you know what you're going to teach on and you know what's on the test, there's a good chance that you're going to stress the elements that you know are going to be on the test, and you're going to spend less time on things that you know you're not testing. If we're looking at an actual achievement test that's being given, for example, by a state or a school system or even the federal government, again, the people teaching, the students that are going to take that test, most likely are aware of what's on that test. And again, we might have teaching the test. So if the goal of achievement is to find out, is the instruction actually getting across the important ideas, are we actually doing that, or are we simply determining, did you learn what you were taught? Now, both of those may be valid in reference, but if we claim that what we're measuring is the construct, for example, knowledge of test and measures, but what I'm actually measuring is your success and knowledge of this particular class, those may be two different things. Potential problems also include that though we may be using national norms, or we may have just an existing set of norms, for example, A, B, C, D, based on a 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% success in the class, those norms may vary by region. If I took the exact same class and taught it in a different state, would I get the same results? Variations in instructors may be very well overlooked. So generally there's an assumption that you as the student, the stakeholder taking the achievement test, should be doing whatever it takes to do well in the class. We all know that different people and different instructors teach in different ways. And we also know that we have our own style of learning. And some of us will learn very well under one instructor, but not another. And that might be reversed with other students as well. We may also be ignoring psychological effects, so basically the impact of how people are being treated in the class, how the university itself is being viewed. So there's something called the Pygmalion effect in psychology. Basically, if you tell people that they're doing very well and that they're elite, they tend to overperform. So when we see actually higher performance at prestigious universities, part of it may simply be the fact that people are at a prestigious university. If we took that exact same person and put them at a university, for example, a 2-year associate's degree college or a junior college, we may actually find their performance goes down a little bit as their expectations are dropped. So that's a psychological effect. And we've already talked about the problems with cultural bias. That again, even when I'm writing a test, I'm writing it based on my own experiences, my own upbringing, the fact that I'm from the Midwest. I've primarily lived in urban centers, and that's going to influence how I write questions. And finally, we get to the question of, are we measuring achievement or are we measuring general intelligence? So someone that has a lot of fluid intelligence typically does better on achievement tests, even though achievement tests are meant to be measuring crystallized intelligence. So how the questions are asked, how the response options are basically presented, that actually falls into fluid intelligence. Someone with high fluid intelligence will probably do okay on just about any achievement test. While someone that has low fluid intelligence, but really did spend a lot of time studying and learning, may still not do quite as well on that achievement test. So that's another problem. So again, based on national norms, I just have a quick map here as an example of states that are failing or succeeding at the national norms of scientific inquiry. So again, red is where we see failure, and you'll notice that it is kind of spread around, and it's not necessarily following any particular path. There's some states that are succeeding and some states that aren't. And that's an example, again, of norms varying by region. Achievement tests are obviously also affected by learning disability, discrepancy between intellect and achievement. So whenever we talk about a learning disability, we're basically saying that there is a disconnect necessarily between the person's abilities and their actual achievement. Problems are often related to difficulties in math, reasoning, reading, writing, spelling, or listening. So when we talk about a learning disability, we're not talking about someone that is cognitively challenged across all areas. We're talking about someone that has a particular difficulty in a specific area. And we want to think about, can we set up interventions that will actually help them in this area? So for example, if someone's not very good at math and math questions, are they good at written or reading questions that involve math? So single problems in processing information rather than an overall impaired ability is what we're talking about when we talk about a learning disability. Often due to problems with the central nervous system, lack of attention, perceptual difficulty, inability to make sense of info, poor motor skills, all of those. For example, my father was dyslexic. He was very good at math, he was very good at listening, and he was pretty good at reasoning. He wasn't very good at spelling, writing, and reading because of his mental, it wasn't mental, it was an actual central nervous system dyslexia. Problems are not related to insufficient education, culture, SES, vision, or hearing. So if these are issues, if it's a vision or hearing thing, then quite honestly, the problem, there may be a difference in how they react with reading and writing, but that's something that can actually be handled through intervention. Generally speaking, also, if it's simply insufficient education, their culture, or their SES, that's not necessarily a learning disability. That is an overall ability that needs to be addressed with the achievement. So let's talk a little bit about measures of general achievement. So these aren't looking at specific class-based knowledge, they're based on general ability to achieve. The Wechsler Intelligent Achievement Test, the WAIT, is an example of this. It's designed for ages 4 to adult, and there are different forms based on your age, and it attempts to discriminate between intelligence and achievement. Measures area specific, specified by the Individuals with Disability Education Act. So specifically, this is around an actual law, and the test is made to look for areas that someone might have a learning disability. Oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, reading comprehension, mathematical computing, and mathematical reasoning. So this is an example of a test that might be given to identify someone with learning disability. So there's also measures of subject achievement. Most achievement tests use a battery of subject tests or cover material of a single subject. Batteries are often standardized measures and can measure, for example, just English skills, math skills, reading comprehension skills, science skills, or history skills. Subject-specific tests tend to cover material from a single class or are constructed by the instructor. So again, when we're looking for specific tests of achievement, we're generally focused on the class itself and the materials that are being presented in that class, by comparison to an overall aptitude or fluid or crystallized intelligence test. Achievement tests at the elementary level. So again, we have various states that have actually created achievement tests to basically find out, do you have the necessary skills that we would expect a student to have at this point? California has the California Achievement Test. There's the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. There's also some federal tests out there. Achievement tests at the high school level include the Cooperative Achievement Test and the Stanford Achievement Test, or the STAT-10. The SAT-10 has kindergarten through high school, strong reliability, and subject and time restrictions vary across grade levels. So again, what's being tested? And the question is these tests are often used to determine should someone pass through to higher levels, regardless of what their individual class performance is. There's also college placement tests, incoming college freshmen, sometimes substituted for entrance scores, basic competency tests, reading, writing, analytic skills given to college sophomores, subject field tests, the major field test in psychology, psychologist tests given to seniors. So again, there's a lot of different forms of educational assessments out there, and the textbook will go into these in a lot more detail. Tests that measure material learned outside of the classroom or through independent studies include the College Level Examination Program, the CLEP, the Proficiency Examination Program, the PEP, or the Test of English as a Foreign Language, the TOEFL, used to administer to English-speaking colleges. So, for example, if you lived in a different country and English was not your primary language, and you are coming to a country where education is done in English, you might have to provide a TOEFL score to represent the fact that you are capable of speaking, writing, and understanding English. Tests used in industrial settings include the state bar exam to become a lawyer, CPA exam to become a certified public accountant, secretarial skill tests, so typing tests to determine if you have the skills necessary to perform in those jobs. Again, these are all examples of subject achievement tests that are out there that are being used across countries or across areas, demographic regions, geographical regions within the United States and other countries. So aptitude tests are usually tests used to determine admission into academic colleges, but they can also be used in other areas. So entrance exams for undergraduate admissions, there's the American College Testing, the ACT, and the Scholastic Assessment Test, the SAT. Both of these are made to measure basically your ability to perform well at a college level. They basically measure both crystal and fluid intelligence, and we're going to get a little bit into exactly what they measure in the next few slides. We also have entrance exams for graduate admissions. We have the Miller's Analogy Test, the MAT, the Law School Admissions Test, the LSAT, the Medical College Admissions Test, the MCAT, and the Graduate Records Exam, GRE. So if you were going into law or the medical field, you'd be taking specifically the Law School Admissions Test or the Medical College Exams Test. If you were going into a highly focused program that looks at your ability to learn information, to master that information, you're probably looking at the GRE. If you're looking at just how you'd perform in more of a performance or a artistic field, you might take the MAT. So let's compare the ACT versus the SAT. These are two aptitude tests that are often used to gain access to college undergraduate programs. The ACT covers English, reading, math, and science. Scores are given on each subtest, but also an overall score. There are 215 questions that are given in 3 hours, and the average national score currently is 21.1. It was actually 20.8 in Illinois. We're actually a little higher in Indiana. We're actually at 21.3. It's published by the ACT. The SAT has two primary subsections, verbal and quantitative. It was new in 2005, was added a written essay component. It's 171 questions given in 2.5 hours. The national verbal is 502, the quantitative is 515, and actually in Illinois, and again, I also taught a lot in Illinois, so you're going to see some Illinois references here. Indiana is very similar here, is actually above the average. Where we actually find lower than average, for example, is in a lot of the southern states. So again, we see these differences. It's published by ETS. One of the reasons the SAT actually gained prominence, and you may have taken it instead of the ACT, is it also mirrors additional testing that happens. So if you look at the GRE that we're going to talk about briefly in the future, the GRE for graduate record exam actually looks at verbal, quantitative, and has a written essay as well. So the MAT solves problems stated as analogies. There's 100 partial analogies given in 50 minutes, broad knowledge of literature, philosophy, history, science, mathematics, and fine arts. It's basically, did you learn what you should have learned as an undergraduate? The LSAT is logic reasoning, practical judgments, data interpretation, quantitative comparisons, principles, and cases. Error recognition, sentence correction, and usage. So again, we look at this as the LSAT is specifically for people going into law school. So the relationship between the LSAT and first year GPA in grad school is an R of 0.04 to 0.56 with a median of 0.34. Correlations do range from school to school. That doesn't represent a strong, so think about 0.34. If we actually did the effect size on that, 0.3 times 0.3, it's basically about 10% of the variance explained. There's a lot more that goes into your success as a student than just your performance in the LSAT. But 10% of your performance is, on average, being explained by your LSAT score. That's why it's being used. It's part of a larger set of data. They'll also look at your GPA, they'll look at your letters of recommendation, they'll look at your statement. All of those are going to be used to try to get a better idea of will you succeed in law school. The MCAT is offered twice a year. Verbal ability is 75 items over 20 minutes. Quantitative is 50 items over 45 minutes. General information that you should have learned as an undergraduate is 75 items in 25 minutes. And then there's 86 science items over 60 minutes. And again, this gives a score that is relatively related to performance in medical school. The GRE has two primary subsections of verbal and quantitative. Again, new in 2003 was the addition of an essay, an analytic writing component. It uses IRT, which is basically a system that basically, again, you don't always get the exact same test. So compared to a lot of these other tests that are standardized items, the GRE actually has a series of items, and you're given items based on the success or failure you have on previous items. It is also published by ETS, which, by the way, is the same company that provides the SAT to get into undergrad. The national average here is a 119 on verbal and a 151 on quantitative. There are subject tests of the GRE as well. So you can take the GRE subject test in psychology, sociology, history, etc. And if we look at the relationship between the GRE and the SAT and GPA, which are similar tests simply aimed at your success in grad school or your success in undergrad, we do find that there is a relationship. So we do find a strong relationship between these two. However, it should be noted that it is not a perfect relationship. There are students that score very poorly on the GPA that get a 3.0 or even a 3.5 or a 4.0 in college. In fact, if we look at this, we find that people that are a full one standard deviation below the mean on the SAT or GRE, there are some of those that are still performing in the 4 to 4.5 range of GPA in a 5-point scale. So again, depends on the universities.